I remember that winter clearer than any other. The year was 1956, the year the river froze solid, and the wind could slice the breath right out of you. Our little town of Willow Creek, Kansas, had only 2 streets that really mattered, Main and Church. And after dark, both went quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat. I was 20 then, working afternoons at Murphy's Diner, saving dimes for a wedding that never happened. That was the winter we first saw Henry Dalton. He came off the evening bus one Thursday, carrying a suitcase small enough to suggest he owned almost nothing at all. Folks said he'd taken a room above the barber shop. The first thing anyone noticed was his coat, a blue wool thing that looked far too fine for a man stepping into a town like ours. The fabric caught the light when he moved, as though it had a life of its own. We all stared. In Willow Creek, even a hint of color felt like scandal. Henry was polite to everyone, but close to no one. He took a clerk's job at the county records office, an endless sea of ledgers and typewriters. Every morning at 8, he'd walk the same route past Murphy's window, tip his hat to me, and keep going. He spoke softly, never lingered. I used to wonder who bought him that coat. No man alone spends his last dollar on beauty unless he's trying to remember someone. By Christmas, gossip had turned him into every story imaginable: a war widower, a runaway banker, a thief hiding from the law. But what we really knew was this: he worked hard, he drank little, and he treated everyone with a kind of careful respect that made you feel seen. In a town where kindness was often rationed, that was enough to make him both liked and distrusted. Then came the storm. It rolled in late one afternoon, gray clouds stacked over the prairie like mountains. Snow came first, then ice, then a silence so deep you could hear the creak of the telephone wires. Henry stayed late at the office that night. The janitor, old Clyde, said he'd seen him reading under a desk lamp, blue coat draped over his chair like a guardian. When Henry finally stepped out into the street, wind whipping so hard it bent the lampposts, he turned toward the boarding house, but never arrived. By morning, Main Street was buried to the knees. Sheriff Dunn organized a search, though most men claimed they had chores too important to leave. The few who went out found nothing but the print of boots leading toward the riverbank and then vanishing. It was as if the snow itself had swallowed him whole. The whole town talked about Henry for weeks. Some said he'd fallen through the ice. Others whispered he'd left on purpose, that men like him never belonged here anyway. Mrs. Murphy cried when she folded the diner napkins. She said he'd once left her a note thanking her for coffee that felt like company. That note stayed pinned above the cash register for years. Life moved on, the way it always does in places where forgetting is easier than asking questions. Spring came. The river thawed. Children played ball again on the dusty lot behind the church. But every so often, someone would claim to have seen a flash of blue down near the bridge, just a shimmer, gone before you could swear to it. Then one evening in May, a boy named Tommy Hill came running into town, white as chalk. He'd been fishing near the bend and found something caught under a fallen branch. sheriff went out, and sure enough, they pulled up a body, thin, pale, wrapped in weeds. Henry Dalton. The blue coat still clung to him like it refused to let go. Folks said his eyes looked peaceful, like a man who'd finally remembered where he was supposed to be. We buried him behind the Methodist church. The whole town turned out, more from guilt than affection. The preacher spoke about humility and the Lord's plan, but I kept thinking about that coat, the way it shimmered under the winter sun. After the service, Sheriff Dunn folded it carefully and handed it to Pete the tailor, saying it ought to be cleaned, and kept till someone claimed it. No one ever did. Weeks later, Pete hung the coat in his window, said maybe it would remind folks to be kind while they still had the chance. People stopped to look, but no one bought it. Maybe we all felt it belonged to Henry still. The color of that blue had changed somehow, less bright, more solemn, like sky after a storm. That's where most stories would end, but not this one, because the summer that followed changed Willow Creek forever. By July, the prairie had turned gold and dry, and Henry's name had begun to fade from conversation. The barber shop filled again with talk of crops and car engines, and the diner jukebox kept spinning the same songs about hearts and highways. But something about that blue coat hanging in Pete's window kept the air a little heavier than before. It was like the town couldn't quite decide whether it felt shame or sorrow. Then one hot afternoon, a stranger stepped off the same evening bus Henry once arrived on. She was a woman of about 30, traveling light, wearing a pale green dress and holding a hat that the wind kept trying to steal. Her name, she said, was Margaret Clay. She asked directions to the records office. The way she said records made it sound like the word hurt her tongue. She came into the diner around noon. I poured her coffee and asked if she was passing through. She smiled, polite but distracted, and asked whether a man named Henry Dalton had ever lived in town. The way the whole room went quiet answered her faster than I could. Mrs. Murphy touched her arm and told her softly that Henry had died that winter. The cup in Margaret's hand trembled, spilling coffee onto the counter, but she didn't seem to notice. She stayed 3 days. She went to the churchyard every morning, sat by Henry's grave, and never said a word to anyone after that first day. On the 4th morning, she went into Pete's shop. I was delivering pies to the cafe next door and saw her standing in front of that coat, one hand on the glass like she was touching Henry himself. Pete told me later she bought it without bargaining. He tried to give her a discount. She wouldn't take it. Said he saved for this. It ought to stay with someone who'll remember. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing her walking down the street with that blue coat folded over her arm. The moonlight made it look alive again, like a ribbon of sky trailing behind her. The next day she was gone. No one saw her leave. The boarding house keeper found her key on the dresser, the bed made, a thank you note folded neat, for the kindness shown to him. Weeks turned into months. The memory of Henry and the mysterious woman became part of local gossip, told over pie, reshaped each time. Some claimed she was his wife. Others said she'd been looking for forgiveness. Only I knew what was written on the small slip of paper she'd dropped under her coffee cup that first day. He never stopped writing to me. I just stopped answering. The following winter came early, sharp as a blade. Snow buried the fences and curled around doors like it meant to stay. Pete kept his shop open with a pot-bellied stove burning slow. One night, he noticed footprints outside his window, small ones, leading up to the spot where the coat had hung. They were half filled with snow, like someone had stood there a long time. He mentioned it to me the next morning, eyes worried, but neither of us said what we were thinking. Life kept shrinking to the size of our habits. Church on Sundays, pie on Fridays, gossip on the porch. Yet sometimes, when I walked home after closing the diner, I'd swear I saw a flash of blue near the edge of the riverbank where Henry had vanished. It was never clear enough to be sure, just a ripple of color, gone when you blinked. Maybe the moon liked to play tricks. Maybe memory does. By the second winter after Henry's death, Margaret returned. Only this time, she wasn't the same woman. Her face looked drawn, her eyes tired. She rented the same small room above the barber shop. Folks whispered that she'd come to stay, that she'd inherited money from some relative out east. She started working part-time at the library, cataloging old documents. Quiet work, the kind Henry would have liked. I began to see her often, walking to work with that blue coat wrapped tight around her shoulders. It looked heavier now, darker too, as though it carried the weight of two souls. People crossed the street to avoid her, out of superstition more than cruelty. You see, in a town that small, sorrow spreads faster than the flu. Sometimes she'd stop by the diner. We'd talk a little about the weather, the books she sorted, the trains that rarely came anymore. Once she asked if I ever dreamed of him. I told her no. That was a lie. In truth, I dreamed of Henry often. Always the same dream. Him standing by the frozen river, head turned slightly, as if listening for someone calling his name. He never looked cold, just lost in thought. When I woke, I'd still feel the wind he'd carried with him. That winter took more from the town than just warmth. The feed mill closed. The barber moved away. Young men left for cities that promised factory paychecks and neon signs. Willow Creek began to feel like a photograph fading at the edges. And through it all, Margaret kept walking those streets in that same blue coat, like a ghost made of color. Years passed, but the town never truly forgot that blue coat. Some said it was cursed. Others said it was blessed. The truth, I think, was that it just carried too much love and too much sorrow for anyone else to wear. Every spring, when the magnolias bloomed and the air turned sweet again, I'd see Margaret sitting by her porch, coat folded neatly on her lap, staring at the tracks that cut through the edge of town. The trains didn't run much anymore. The depot was quiet, the benches rotten, the timetables faded into ghosts of old paper. But she sat there anyway, her eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for something that everyone else had already stopped believing in. And sometimes, Jan, sometimes I swore I saw him too, that man in the blue coat, standing just beyond the fog at dusk, near the crossing, tall, still, a shape more memory than flesh. He never moved, he never waved, but he was there, the way certain regrets stay in your vision long after you close your eyes. I remember one night in particular. It was late autumn, 1968. The leaves were dying in gold and rust, and Margaret's health had begun to fade like the paint on her porch rail. I brought her soup that evening, same as I did every week. She didn't eat much anymore, just stirred it slowly, the way a person might stir time itself. We talked about small things, the new pastor, the price of sugar, the frost that was coming early. But her eyes kept drifting toward the window, where the fog pressed against the glass like something alive. Finally, she whispered, "He came again last night." My spoon froze midair. "Who did, honey?" I asked, though I already knew. "The man in the blue coat." She smiled then, a soft, trembling smile that scared me more than any scream ever could. He didn't say a word this time, just stood there, same as before. I think he waits for me now. I didn't know what to say. How do you comfort someone who's waiting to be taken by love or death and can't tell the difference anymore? A week later, the town woke up to snow. The first of the season, white and clean and cruelly beautiful. That morning, I went to check on Margaret. Her porch was empty, but the front door was ajar. Inside, the air smelled of lilacs, her perfume, and the faint salt of old tears. Her chair was empty, her cup still warm, and there, hanging by the door, was the blue coat, not folded, not abandoned, hanging like it had just been taken off. We searched for her for days. The sheriff, the church boys, the whole block, every street, every field near the tracks. But she was gone. No footprints in the snow, no signs of struggle, nothing. Just silence. Then, on the fourth night, the station master swore he saw her. Said a woman in a blue coat walked down the platform, her hair bright under the lamplight, her eyes fixed on the empty tracks. A train, one that hadn't run for years, came roaring out of the mist, its whistle crying like something alive. She stepped aboard, he said, without looking back. And then gone. The train, the woman, the sound, everything. People laughed at him, called it whiskey talk. But when I went down there the next morning, I saw two things that turned my heart to stone. The first was the old timetable, flipped open for the first time in decades. The second was a single glove, lying by the rail, soft blue wool, frayed at the wrist. I still keep that glove in a box by my bedside. Sometimes, when the night is quiet and the wind blows in from the west, I take it out and hold it against my cheek. It still smells faintly of rain and lavender, just like her. You see, I've lived long enough to know that some goodbyes never end. They just change shape from faces to memories, from voices to echoes, from love to silence. And sometimes, when the world grows still, I swear I hear that whistle again, faint, far off, riding the wind across the fields. I tell myself it's only my mind playing tricks, the way old hearts do when they've carried too much for too long. But deep down, I think I know better. Some trains don't run on rails. Some of them run on promises, the kind made between souls who can't stop loving, even when the tracks have ended. So when I go, when it's finally my turn to leave this old world behind, I hope I'll see that blue coat again. Maybe she'll be standing there, just beyond the fog, smiling that quiet, impossible smile. Maybe the train will come again, slow and patient, and maybe this time I'll step aboard too. And if anyone ever asks about me, the old woman who used to talk about the man in the blue coat, you can tell them this. She wasn't crazy. She was just waiting.